Hey guys, miss y'all and want to shout out to all the people that are doing their work and what they're supposed to. So today what we're going to be reading is chapter 7. So you're going to be doing only the assignments on chapter 7 today. Chapter 6 was yesterday. So we're doing the assignments on chapter 7. Chapter 7 is titled, This Is It, Boys. So obviously every chapter title has some kind of meaning. So if you remember, the last place that we left Louis was with his flight crew. They have just gone through training, and so now they've been stationed as a bomber crew. Louis is a bomber, but they've been stationed as a bomber crew in Hawaii. So we're going to pick up and see what happens in this chapter. Okay, this is it, boys. Oahu was still ringing from the Pearl Harbor attack. The roads were pocked with bomb craters. The island was on constant alert for attack or invasion. And so camouflaged, a serviceman wrote, one only sees about a third of what is actually there. So you got to think about it. Oahu, at this point, the island of Oahu, Hawaii, they've just been attacked, so they've hidden everything that's still there. At night, it disappeared. Every window had light-proof curtains, every car had covered headlights, and blackout patrols forbade even the striking of a match. The servicemen wore gas masks in hip holsters. Surfers had to worm under barbed wire running along Waikiki Beach. At Kahuku Air Base on Oahu's North Shore, Louis and Phil were assigned to a barracks with Mitchell, Mosnet, 12 other officers, and hordes of mosquitoes. You kill one, Phil wrote, and 10 more come to the funeral. The barracks, Phil added, looked like a dozen dirty Missouri pigs had been wallowing in it. The nonstop revelry didn't help. One night, as Louis and Phil wrestled over a beer, they plowed down 3 wall partitions. So 3 wall divisions, Louis and Phil go through them. When William Matheny, their colonel, saw the wreckage, he grumbled that Zamperini must have been involved. This is a picture of Louis waking up late one morning after lots of fun. Everyone was eager to fight, but there was no combat. In its place was sea search, a dull day-long ocean flying patrol that was overseen by a lieutenant that everybody hated. He was a nitpicker and a rank puller. He was loathed thanks to an incident in which one of the Superman's engines quit mid-flight. When Phil returned the plane to the base, the furious lieutenant ordered them to go back up. So think about this. They hate this lieutenant that they're under because when one of the Superman's engines quits, Phil manages to get the plane back down to the landing. And then instead of saying, whew, I'm so glad y'all made it back, the guy's like, what are y'all doing down here? Y'all need to get back up in the sky. When Louis offered to fly on 3 engines if the lieutenant joined them, the lieutenant abruptly changed his mind. The dullness of sea search made practical joking irresistible. When a ground officer griped about airmen's higher pay, the crew invited him to fly on the plane. They sat him in the co-pilot seat while Louis hid under the navigator's table by the yoke of the control chains. When the officer took the yoke, Louis tugged the chains, making the plane swoop up and down. The officer panicked, and Louis smothered laughter, and Phil kept a poker face. The officer quit carping about airmen's pay. So they are playing a bunch of jokes on people. They end up rigging the steering wheel to where it looks like somebody's underneath it pulling it, so it looks like that they're about to crash. Louis' most notorious pranks involve Phil, chewing gum, and their new co-pilot, a massive ex-football player named Charlton Cuppernell, who replaced Mosnet when the latter joined another crew. In the first incident, after Cuppernell and Phil swiped his beer, Louis retaliated by jamming gum into the cockpit, and this is Cuppernell. So Louis gets back at them by putting gum in the cockpit of the urine relief tube. So basically he puts gum in the urinal, which what's going to happen if they're flying and there's gum that's stopping up the urinal? On the next flight, The call of nature was followed by an inexplicably brimming urine tube turbulence and at least one wet airman. Louis hid in Honolulu to escape a punishment. On another occasion, to get even with Cuppernell and Phil for stealing his gum, Louis replaced it with a laxative variety. Y'all know what a laxative is. It makes you go. Just before a long flight, Cuppernell and Phil each stole 3 pieces of gum, tripling the standard dose. As the Superman flew, pilot and co-pilot, in great distress, made alternate dashes to the back of the plane, yelling for someone to get a toilet bag. When the bags were used up, Cuppernell dropped his pants and hung his enormous rear out of the window, while 4 crewmen hung onto him to keep him from falling out. When the ground crew saw the results on the plane's tail, they were furious. It was like an abstract painting, Louis said. Phil's boredom remedy was hot dogging. Returning from sea search, he'd buzz Oahu so low that you could look straight into the first floor windows of the buildings. It was, he said, kind of daring. So they're bored because of sea search, so they're pulling off all these crazy stunts. On their days off, the crew played poker and divvied up CC's care packages, and Louis and Phil tooled around in borrowed cars. Along the way, they came upon several airfields and were amazed to discover that all of these planes and equipment were made of plywood, an elaborate ruse to fool the Japanese flying reconnaissance. So, while they're flying around, they notice that there's all these airfields that look like planes are in it, but they're actually cardboard, and it's used to try and trick the Japanese. So if they bomb, they're going to bomb cardboard instead of planes. One day, this information would be very important. Paradise was the officers' club, and there was beer and pretty girls with 10:30 curfews. When the crew got on the squadron's best gunnery scores, Louis pinned officers' insignias to the enlisted men's uniform and snuck them down in. Just after Louis rose to dance with a girl, Colonel Matheny sat down in his place and began talking to the terrified Clarence Douglas, who was pretending to be a second lieutenant. When Louis ran to Douglas's rescue, the unsuspecting colonel got up and told him what a fine young man Douglas was. On the dance floor, Louis spotted the hated lieutenant who had ordered them to fly on only 3 engines. He found a bag of flour, recruited a girl, and began dancing near the lieutenant, dropping flour down his collar with each pass. After an hour, the whole club was watching. Louis snagged a glass of water, danced up behind his victim, dumped the water down his shirt, and took off. The lieutenant spun around, his back running with dough. Okay, so if you think about this is a good central idea. The author informs readers that Louis is a prankster, continually pranking other people. So this would be an example of Louis pranking. All those things that just happened in the passage. Louis scaring the pilot by yanking the steering wheel of the plane, him putting the laxative in, putting flour down that guy's shirt. Any of that in this current section would be evidence to prove the central idea. Now let's look back at the previous text. Think about chapter 1. Think about how bad Louis was as a kid and all the pranks he used to pull. Any of those would go on a running list for this central idea that Louis is a prankster. Okay. Just before Christmas, the crew's hour finally came. Ordered to fly to Midway Island, where they were greeted with a case of Budweiser and big news, the Japanese had built a base on the Wake Atoll. Remember, atoll is an island. In the Pacific War's biggest raid yet, America was going to burn that island down. Ooh. It would be a 16-hour mission, nonstop, pushing the B-24 as far as it could go. Even with the extra fuel tanks, they would be cutting it extremely close. On December 23rd, 1942, the B-24s lifted off the Midway runway. Superman slipped towards the rear. The planes flew through the afternoon and into night. At 11 p.m., Phil switched off the outside lights. The clouds closed in. Wake was very close now, but he couldn't see it. In the greenhouse, Louis felt a buzzing in himself, the same sensation that he had felt before races. Ahead of them, the island of Wake slept. Here's a picture of Louis and the crew underneath Superman. At midnight, Colonel Matheny, piloting the lead plane, broke the radio silence. "This is it, boys." Remember, they're going in a sneak attack, and they're bombing the island of Wake, which has that Japanese fort. Okay. Matheny sent his bomber plunging out of the clouds, and there was Wake. He barreled towards the string of buildings, hauled the plane's nose up, and yelled to the bombardier, "When are you going to turn loose the incendiaries? They're gone, sir." At that instant, the buildings exploded. Behind Matheny, wave after wave of B-24s dove at Wake. The Japanese ran for their guns. In Superman, well behind and above the leading planes, Louis saw throbs of light in the clouds. As Phil began the plane's dive, Louis opened the bomb bay doors, flipped the bomb switches, and fixed the settings. The orders were to dive 4,000 feet, but when the plane searched that altitude, it was still in the clouds. Louis' target was the airstrip, but he couldn't see it. Phil pushed the plane lower, moving at a terrific speed. At 2,500 feet, Superman speared through the clouds and Wake stretched out, sudden and brilliant, beneath it. The island was ablaze with bright light. Everywhere, bombs were striking, and there were targets in mushrooms of fire. Searchlights swung about, their beams reflecting off the clouds and back onto the ground, illuminating tons of Japanese in their sleep clothes sprinting in confusion. To Pillsbury, every gun in the world seemed to be firing skyward. Anti-aircraft guns lobbed shells over the planes where they erupted, sending shrapnel showering down. Tracer bullets emitting color to allow gunners to see where they were firing streaked into the air yellow, red, and green. Watching the clamor of colors, Pillsbury thought of Christmas. Then he remembered they'd crossed the international date line past midnight. It was Christmas. So they've got this huge battle that they're a part of. They're supposed to bomb this one place, and there is gunfire and planes everywhere. Everywhere. Phil wrestled the Superman out of its dive. Louis spotted the tail light of a Japanese Zero fighter plane rolling down the runway, and he aimed for it. Very close by, something exploded, and the Superman rocked. A shell burst by the left wing, and then another by the tail. Louis loosed a bomb over the Zero, and then dropped his 5 other bombs over bunkers and parked planes. Relieved of 3,000 pounds of bombs, the Superman bobbed upward. Louis yelled, "Bombs away!" and Phil rolled the plane left, through the steams of anti-aircraft fire. Louis looked down. His bombs had landed in splashes of fire on the bunkers and planes. He had missed his target, but had bullseyed the runway. Phil turned the Superman back for Midway. Wake was a sea of fire and running men. As the Superman flew for home, Louis realized that they had a huge problem. The bomb bay doors were stuck. So the doors that are underneath the plane, and if you don't close them, A, you can fall out of them, but also B, it slows. Have you ever rolled the windows down in a car and you A, heard that noise, but it also slows down the speed of the car, or you have to work harder, there's more air resistance on the car. Same thing here, so they can't close those doors. He climbed back and looked. When Phil had wrenched the plane out of its dive, the auxiliary fuel tanks had slid into the doors. Nothing could be done. So all their extra fuel has fallen through those open bomb doors. All their extra fuel.